Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracing an epic historical expansion detailed in the Book of Acts. We're going to look at the ultimate grassroots campaign, how a localized, highly vulnerable movement survived the mighty Roman Empire and created a literal global ripple effect. Let's dive right into the mechanics of how an idea spreads against all odds. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving through four main acts: the spark in Jerusalem, breaking the boundaries, Paul's radical transformation, and finally, collision with the empire. So let's jump right into part one, the spark in Jerusalem, the movement's epicenter. Right out of the gate in chapter 1, the text lays down a highly specific three-step blueprint for growth. Start in Jerusalem, move out to Judea and Samaria, and finally, reach the ends of the earth. Everything we are about to explore in this 27-chapter story executes this exact geographic strategy to a T. And honestly, the sheer scale of this phenomenon early on is mind-blowing. After an event known as Pentecost, where the followers reportedly experienced the Holy Spirit as a violent wind and literal tongues of fire, Peter steps up and gives a massive public speech. The text records that 3,000 followers joined the movement on a single day. 3,000! I mean, that wasn't just a slow, methodical trickle of new members. It was an overnight explosion that instantly rewired the social dynamics of the city. What's really fascinating here is the staggering diversity of that initial crowd. We're talking Parthians, Medes, Egyptians, and even visitors all the way from Rome. Because it was a major festival, the city was absolutely packed. And this tells us right away, this message was never meant to stay local. These visitors were the perfect conduits to carry the idea back across international borders like wildfire. But, naturally, rapid growth like that triggers immediate pushback. The local authorities arrest leaders Peter and John, ordering them to shut it down. But the founders establish a profound precedent for civil disobedience right then and there. They look the authorities dead in the eye and say, "Judge for yourselves whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than God." The stage is officially set for conflict. Which brings us to part 2, breaking the boundaries, expanding beyond the mold. The catalyst for the next phase of expansion is, it's actually quite violent. Following the execution of a man named Stephen, a severe persecution breaks out against the church in Jerusalem. But ironically, it's this intense persecution, which was fully intended to completely crush the believers, that actually forces them to flee the city. By scattering them throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, their opponents accidentally execute the second step of their own geographic blueprint perfectly. Talk about a backfire, right? So as they spread, they hit a massive cultural wall. For centuries, strict separation and dietary restrictions kept non-Jews entirely out. But then, Peter receives this bizarre vision that results in a radical new directive. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. By shattering centuries of tradition, they effectively removed the highest barrier to entry, basically opening the doors for anyone to join the community. But of course, this massive integration creates immense internal friction. Can you really just bypass ancient laws? So the leaders convene the Jerusalem Council to hammer out exactly how these completely diverse cultures can coexist. They end up striking a historic compromise. Circumcision is not required for Gentiles, but they are asked to adhere to baseline rules regarding food and morality. This right here is the monumental pivot point that fully untethers the movement from strict ethnic boundaries. And that sets the stage perfectly for part 3, Paul's radical transformation, the ultimate plot twist. The text introduces us to a man named Saul, who later goes by Paul. Now, originally, he is described as a violent persecutor of the early church. He's the very guy breathing murderous threats and guarding the coats of the men who stoned Stephen. But his sudden pivot from the absolute greatest threat of the movement to its greatest champion is just a masterclass in character development. He goes on to become their most prolific missionary to the Roman world. So, how does that even happen? Well, the narrative describes its dramatic, blinding encounter on the road to Damascus. A light flashes, he falls to the ground, and a voice asks, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" This single, intense experience completely rewrites his entire worldview. But it doesn't extinguish his zealous energy. Actually, scratch that, it completely weaponizes it in the opposite direction, pointing him directly toward the non-Jewish world. Let's look at how that plays out in our final section, part 4. Collision with the Empire, the Final Frontiers. As Paul travels the Mediterranean, he doesn't just preach, he disrupts, big time. His teachings clash head-on with local economies and pagan traditions. In Philippi, he's beaten and imprisoned, only to be freed by a literal earthquake. In Thessalonica, an angry mob accuses him of declaring another king, defying Caesar himself. And in Ephesus, his message that man-made gods are no gods at all, it sparks a massive 2-hour riot led by silversmiths who are losing money on their shrines to the goddess Artemis. It is widespread chaos at pretty much every single stop. And Paul's legal troubles escalate at a truly relentless pace. It begins with a near-death mob beating in the Jerusalem temple, leading to his arrest. He spends years locked up in Caesarea, stands trial before a governor, and even survives a brutal, harrowing shipwreck on his way to Rome. The narrative pacing in these final chapters is absolutely breathless. But here's the thing. Paul isn't just swept along by the current. He actively uses the Roman legal system to his absolute advantage. When faced with the threat of a completely unfair trial in Jerusalem, Paul makes a brilliant legal maneuver. He leverages his protected status as a Roman citizen and simply declares, "I appeal to Caesar." By demanding an audience with the emperor, he forces the Roman government to provide him safe transport to the capital, ensuring his message reaches the very heart of the empire. Before he even ships out, he's given the floor to defend himself before local royals. And the sheer audacity of Paul's defense during these high-stakes political trials is just captivating. He is so logical, so passionate, and so unrelenting that he leaves King Agrippa utterly astonished, prompting the king to ask, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" His unyielding conviction, even in the face of absolute power, is staggering. The book of Acts ends incredibly abruptly, with Paul under house arrest yet still preaching boldly right in the heart of Rome. The story is left intentionally open-ended, bringing us to this final, lingering thought. How did an obscure, heavily persecuted sect survive the full, crushing weight of the Roman Empire to become a global phenomenon? It's a true masterclass in resilience, grassroots ideology, and absolute transformation. The blueprint was laid, the boundaries were broken, and that ripple effect, well, we're still feeling it today.